one's brain is more difficult than you think. That, in particular, what does not work is it is almost impossible to get someone to learn something by assembling them all in a room and having an expert lecture to them. So it's a little known fact that lectures are generally a waste of time. Right now, I'm wasting your time. So why do we do lectures? Because lectures are cheap. Lectures are cheap. And that's why one does lectures. That's why we do PowerPoints. It's easy. But lectures are not actually very efficient. So if I were to lecture you on what's on chapter 1 in the book, by putting up PowerPoint slides that show an abbreviated form of what's in the book, what you would learn from there is exactly nothing. Because, let's face it, if the PowerPoint slides had been better than the book, why would we have printed the book in the first place? We would have just handed you the PowerPoint slides and said, here it is, the knowledge. So the PowerPoint slides have to be worse than the book. Otherwise, you would have bought the PowerPoint slides. So if the book is better, then why don't you read the book instead of listening to an abbreviated version of it in PowerPoint? So by itself, me presenting the PowerPoint of what's in the book is never going to be of any use. And so I will not do that. That unfortunately means that you're deprived of 75 minutes of relaxation. And I know from my student evaluations that students do not take that idea kindly. At the end of every semester, there's a few students who say, he didn't lecture. And that's fine. So I will expect you to read the book before class. I will not expect you to understand it. Because if you understood it, why were you taking the course? You could just bought the book. So I expect you to read a section or 2 or 3 of the book before class. I will have a little quiz, an online quiz that you need to take before class, just to verify that you did the reading. That'll ask some easy questions about the material. And then we're going to spend the class time going over the difficult parts. So I will go selectively drill into some of those things that I know are difficult for students. I will come up with extra examples that would show why they're difficult. I would answer questions that you might have about the homework. The homework, of course, is going to exercise some of these difficult parts. So much of the lecture part in class is going to be with the challenging part of the material. But it's only going to work if you read the easy parts. Because if you don't read the easy parts, then I'm going to say, well, now we're going to be talking about whatever, doubly nested loops. And if you don't know what a single loop is in the first place, then all of that stuff is going to get past you. I sometimes find students who say, oh, I'm going to go to class, I'm going to take notes, and then I'm going to read through my notes at home again, and then I'm going to figure it all out. Well, that's stupid. First of all, what am I going to say in class that's not in the... I mean, you could just read the book while you read your notes. Are your notes going to be any better than the book? If they are, why didn't you write the book? So it's unlikely that that's going to work. And so the time in class is better spent with discussing difficult subjects, things that are not easily writable in book form. As it happens, I wrote this book. And so every time that I try to write something that talks about how do you plan an activity, how do you get ideas, how do you find out which ideas are good, which ideas are bad. So I honestly try to write those in chapter form, and every time the reviewers reject them, because they have a different approach for it. They don't like to have those things spelled out. And that's the kind of expertise that you get from a human and not from a book. So that's what we're going to be spending a lot of time on. But it's going to mean that the lectures are not in the format that you're used to. So it's going to be a short lecture, and in the short lecture I try to, as much as possible, answer what questions you might have. If you have questions, that makes everyone's job so much easier. So I'm really hoping for that, and I'll show you how I'm going to encourage that. And then we're going to be having a lab that's either a computer lab or it's going to be once in a while it's going to be something with pencil and paper. Oops, I forgot to write that on the slide. And so for every one of these things, you're going to be bringing with you your laptop. Everyone has to have a laptop with Java installed. There's installation instructions in the first homework. And so if that's the problem, you really need to procure a laptop. You need to have your own laptop in front of you. We're going to be doing lots of work with that laptop. Sometimes, like I say, there's going to be pencil and paper activities, so please also bring a pencil, not a pen, but a pencil, an erasable thingy, like they used to use last century, and paper, some notebooks that you can sketch out things quickly. That does make a big difference for some activities. So you're going to be doing a lot of stuff in class, and hopefully you're going to be doing badly at some of them, because that then gives me an opportunity to figure out where you have trouble, and then I can talk about how to do some of those things. So if everyone does really well, then you don't learn anything by doing everything really well. You learn by trying something, by having a hard time with it, and that's what changes your brain. So back to this sketch here. It turns out that there's a lot of research on how do people make long-term changes in their brain. And so they get some input, and then they process that input, and the brain is a marvelous machine at throwing away more than 99% of the information that comes at it. And that's very important, because it does not have the storage capacity to store absolutely everything that goes on in your life. So what the brain is looking for is extraordinary events. An elderly person standing in front of a whiteboard, opening and closing his mouth, is not an extraordinary event. And so your brains are primed to throw away most of that stuff. But once in a while something does stick for a little while, and then it goes away after a day or so. To make it stand there longer than a day, what is important is that you yourself have to come up with a hypothesis that you want to test. That you say, what if I do this? Without you saying, what if I? It is impossible for the brain to retain any information. And then the fourth thing that's somewhat surprising is that what if it has to trigger a response that uses your muscles, your limbs, your body in some way. There's some people who actually make people walk around and enact things in class, and that does kind of work. It's just very time consuming. So we're going to do it in a slightly lesser way, that what you're going to be doing is you're going to be using your hands to type things, you're going to be using your hands to draw things. And that, by the way, is why note-taking actually works. The value of note-taking is that it forces you to make a decision what to write down. You could, on the way out of class, throw the notes in the shredder, and they would have already done their effect. So you can try that. Take notes in some class, throw the notes away, and you will have done what the notes can do for you. Assuming that you've had a good textbook that's going to be better organized than your notes, there's no long-term value. But the value of the notes is that it forces you to use your limbs, your hands, to translate some of those decisions into actions. And that's how our brain is wired. Once you have carried out some actions with your body, not just with your mind, but with your body, then stuff gets moved into long-term storage. There's no path to long-term storage that does not involve kinetic activity, which is kind of strange. But that's the only brain we got, so we've got to use it for that. So the other thing is homework. So there'll be lots of homework. And the trouble, let's see, do I have a slide on this? Yes, I do. All right, so I'll talk about that. All right, so a couple of the challenges about the course, because it's always best to bring that up at first. The reason I have the lady on the left is a couple hundred years ago, if you had been born in a certain social circle and your parents would have had the money to pay for this, you would have learned to play the piano tolerably well. Everyone knew how to play the piano tolerably well in those circles. And there wasn't a question of, did you have the aptitude? Were you incompetent? There wasn't a question. Everyone could learn how to do this by given a few years of potentially tedious instruction. It was just expected. And so the good thing is, the same thing is true with programming. Everyone can do tolerably well at basic programming. Not everyone is going to become a supermaster programmer, but everyone can program well enough to pass this class, if that's what they want to do. Now, of course, the lady on the painting, she wanted to do it simply because she didn't have much of another choice. I guess she could have become a scullery maid, but if she wanted to stay in her social circles, she had to learn the piano. With you, it's not quite like that. But yeah, maybe you want to pitch it like that to yourself, that someone who doesn't know how to program, what good are they? So you should probably learn it. So it's not a question of aptitude. It is something our brains are wired to be able to do these kinds of things. you need to have some ability to read, to write, and to do basic arithmetic. But we're not talking calculus here. So if I told you that calculus was a prerequisite, that's just not the case. And some people say the mathematical maturity for calculus. That's not the case either. So once in a while, we might have a sine or cosine popping up, which I fully expect you to have forgotten unless you're engineering students. And then you just look it up again, and it'll all come back for what we need for it. But it's not going to happen very often. But if God forbid we have a robot moving around a circle, you might need it. So people can learn this. Now, it is interesting, but it's not necessarily interesting at 2 a.m. when you're stuck in the middle of a tedious assignment. That some of these assignments are boring. They say, print out all digits of pi or something. And why would you care? I mean, you could just look them up on the internet, couldn't you? But some of the assignments are just like some of the piano exercises are really boring, and you just have to do them to get past them. So yes, computer science is creative, but not necessarily all the time in the first semester. We're trying to make it as good as possible. Some of the labs are pretty nice, but that's just the way it is. But the biggest issue is time. That the lady didn't learn piano by listening to records, even if records had existed then, or by listening to other piano players. That lady must have played a lot of piano. And so you're going to be spending a lot of time writing computer programs. And that's really that's how you learn. And so then there's this issue of study habits. In many courses, you can succeed just fine by cramming the night before an exam or a homework and by pushing it all in. And computer science, just like playing a piano, simply does not work like that. It is impossible. It is physically impossible to complete a program, even an easy program, like in an hour or so. Just because what happens is you look at the thing and your brain is not quite ready for it. And if you try to force it, all you do is you get very, very anxious. I know that because right now I have a deadline and I'm in this process. I have to tell Kai, don't do it. Take it easy. It's going to happen. So your brain needs this time, and that's hard to do for many students because you're so used to being drilled on multiple choice exams or stuff that's kind of voluminous but not necessarily all that difficult. And so you've had good success with doing things only in the last minute, and it simply does not work. And people try it anyway. So what does that mean? First off, so I expect you to come to class, every class meeting. That includes these labs, and we talked about that. I really expect you to do the assigned reading before class, and you'll need to find the time to do it. I don't expect you to understand everything, but I do expect you to kind of read through it, figure out what are the easy things, and with the hard ones, let you know what you don't understand. So you can ask a question and say, this appears to be difficult. And then I'll be glad to spend as much time as necessary on the hard part. So, but like I won't lecture you on what are the rules for variable names in Java. You can use letters and numbers, and not this or not that. I'm not adding any value by reading that for you. The most important part is that when I give you a programming assignment, I want you to submit 2 versions of it. One version on one day and the other version on the next day. And the reason for that is so that you don't start an hour before it's due. That way it's physically impossible to start an hour before it's due because you have to start 2 days before it's due to submit that first draft. That first draft is usually very trivial. It just means make something that compiles and has a couple of comments in it, maybe. I'll tell you what I want in that first draft. Usually something that's really easy. But the reason I want that first draft is that's when I get questions. That's when students say, oh my goodness, how on earth is this robot going to make a circle and another circle to make a figure 8? And that, of course, is a very good question, and I want that question in class and not 2 hours before the assignment is due. So that is the motivation for doing this. It does mean that you're going to have a never-ending stream of little homework. So it's not going to be, in the olden days, what we used to do is we would give 6 homework assignments that would do 6 times a semester, and it just did not work. Students just would do it a few days, would start doing it a couple days before it's due. They would never have the questions answered, and in the end, literally half of them copied them, bits and pieces from each other, and you don't really learn a lot by copy and paste, as you know. And so we're not interested in having 30 students have that robot make a figure eight. That's just a tool to change your brain. That's just a tool to make you learn. And copy and paste doesn't do that. So it's very important that